Okay, so we might get going then, if that suits everyone. So, welcome to the virtual Solvency II Compliance Assessment Tool Seminar. It's a shame that we can't see you all in person. Normally we'd be in the Conrad together in one of the rooms upstairs, and we had a few coffees at this stage, had a bit of a chat outside, and we'll be setting off into the presentations. We thought it'd still be useful maybe for some people to get this annual refresher. And I suppose there's two different elements to it. We like to do a bit of hands-on the tool to give you a refresher before you start into your end as to what the tool looks like again, and some of the main functionality you will be working with. So Gavin will be talking you through that later. The other thing we like to show in the tool as well is some of the new functionality that's been added. So there's always new bits and pieces of the tool, so we've highlighted some of those new pieces that might be of use to you. And then the other side is just on the regulatory side and the content side. So giving you an update on what has happened this year and what is going to be happening into the future. So another little bit of housekeeping. So if you do want to obtain some CPD for this session, and even it's useful for ourselves to kind of know who is here, if you could fill in the form that's going to be posted in the Q&A box now. Hopefully that's gone out. So that form, if you can fill in your details there, just so we have a record that you did attend, that'd be very useful. Hopefully that's appearing for you now in the Q&A. Right, so I'm going to kick off. I think I've covered the welcome piece, so we'll move on from there. So the agenda, again, I've kind of glossed over this already, so we're going to start off actually with the updates to the tool, and I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to hand you over to Sinead Clark, and she's going to talk you through some of the other upcoming pieces, like the Solvency 2020 review, and also some stuff that's coming in potentially on recovery and resolution planning. And then finally we'll have the piece with Gavin, and he'll do the refresher session, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end as well. So if there is any questions you have, as they come to you, feel free to pop them into that questions and answers box, and we'll hopefully get to those then. So just a general business update. So yes, as many of us are, I suppose in Milliman we are working remotely. So it is all business as usual though. So I am working from home. You might see that if there's a dog barking in the background at some stage. So we did change over pretty quickly to work from home. There's been no impact on service levels, so we were all set up for that. The best way to contact us with your queries is as before. So use the S2CAT help desk email, and that's the best way through someone out of the office. That there's a team of people who do monitor that. So please continue to do that. As regards Vitality, a similar situation. They are business as usual, and again, service levels not impacted there. They're working remotely and everything's going fine. I think they did actually have a bit more freedom down in Tralee than we did up here in Dublin for a while. So another piece of news, I suppose, on Vitality's front, and some exciting news for them, is that they have merged with another company, Policyworks. So this is great news for Vitality, and they've been looking to grow and expand their footprint in the US, and this merger is really kind of how they're going to do that. So this will mean that they have a broader reach to their own clients, and it'll also help more investment in the tool and the software. So again, very exciting news for Vitality, and we wish them all the best with it. And there's some information there in the press release that they heard earlier in the year. And I think some of the crew from Vitality actually are on the line today. So and again, if there's any queries, we'll hopefully be able to, if there's anything specific for them, we can hopefully pass them through to them in the Q&A or something like that. So I'm going to kick off then with the Solvency II update piece. Maybe just a bit of a recap. I'm going to first talk about some of the changes that have happened to date, and then I'll talk a bit about the future changes before we get into the nitty-gritty detail. So we have been in Solvency II world, I suppose, for quite a while now, and there's a lot of changes have come through in that period. So I listed a few of them here, and kind of to give you a brief run down memory lane, I suppose. So back in 2016, 2017, there were some changes to delegated regulations, and the implementing regulations for reporting QRTs came into place, and then financial stability QRTs. Then you had the Irish Transpositional Directive, and all of those other reporting and QRTs and public disclosure items at the end of 2017. From there, If you cycle into 2018, the CBI were active, so they made the domestic actuarial regime. So that's something specific to Irish companies, and that's in our Irish version of the tool, not in the European version. We also then have some other updates coming through the delegated regulations, minor edits there. We had updates to the financial stability reporting. Pretty much every year end at Q4, we have an update to the QRTs. So there was quite a few changes there at that Q4 2018 that went through. And then midway through 2019, we had that interim review of Solvency II, which was the 2018 interim review, but it actually only came into force. Part of it in 2019, halfway through the year, and actually part of it on the 1st of January of this year. They were the kind of changes we talked about last year, and we would have talked about this seminar. And again, as at year end, there was a raft of changes going through the QRTs. So, you know, tidy ups and other bits and pieces. And some of those were to do with the amendments to delegated regulations. So that's kind of how it's happened in the past few years. I suppose looking forward then, and what are we going to be talking about this year? The EIOPA taxonomy updates. So again, some edits to the QRTs, but you'll be happy to know that they aren't as wide sweeping as the previous years. They will be enforced for year end. Another new piece is that there's a new level 3 guideline. So there's a guideline on information and communication technology, security and governance. So there's quite a bit of detail in that. So another one of those level 3 guidelines, and I'll talk a bit about what's involved in that. So that has now been published, but it won't actually come into force until June 2021. So we'll be updating the tool in the middle of next year to reflect that, but we'll maybe just give you a heads up on it now. Something that may or may not, I suppose, fall within the realms of the Solvency II world is recovery and resolution planning. So there is a bit of a strand on recovery and resolution planning in the Solvency II 2020 review. However, the CBI have decided that they will potentially implement some recovery and resolution methods and requirements for companies in Ireland before that date. So with that end, they issued a consultation paper, and they issued that earlier this year, and the consultation is actually now closed. But all the noises from the CBI is that they will bring this into force during 2021. So we'll keep a watching brief on that. And I suppose we also will keep a watching brief as to whether that kind of falls within this Solvency II world and way of thinking, and therefore would be captured within the tool. Then the other piece, and it was something that we've been talking now last year and the year before, is the 2020 review. So that's the large review that's been undertaken. And Sinead's going to talk us through a bit of that as to where that is. So that's the quick refresher and the recap of what's happened in the past. So now we can get into a bit of detail on the impending changes that are coming down the tracks. So I'm going to kick off quarterly reporting templates from EIOPA. So again, it's no real surprise that EIOPA are doing an update this year end. They do publish a schedule of when they expect to do these updates. So you can see there on that graph, there is a scheduled update there for the end of 2020. So that's the one that we're currently looking at. And you'll also note that there is actually a new taxonomy scheduled 2.6.0, maybe in the middle of next year. So if we are implementing some changes around those level 3 guidance on information communication technology, it might be a timely time to also put in those other taxonomy changes. So that just remains to be seen what does come out of that. So in terms of taxonomy 2.5.0, that will be live for this year end. And really, they've posted new GPM and XBRL taxonomy packages on their site. There isn't a huge amount in it, as I said. In terms of where this will appear in the tool, it's mainly going to come through as new reporting templates. So when you're looking at that pillar 3 section of your tool, in those QRT sections, so the QRT quarterly solo module and the QRT quarterly annual module, you will see new links popping up in there for new files that have been added. So you can see that there at the bottom of the screen. So we'll be putting those through in December, and we'll send out a release note following that. So some of the items, as I said, they aren't massive. So things around cleanups, minor typos, removing of crossed out things. So I've pulled out a few examples of this in the next few slides. I won't dwell on any of them too much. One is there's now the option to include a direct URL to your SFCR, so your Solvency and Financial Condition report within your annual QRTs. So that's currently marked though as voluntary, so you don't necessarily have to provide that link. Often when they put something in and it's voluntary initially, you wonder, is it because they're going to make it mandatory the following year? But for now, you don't have to, but the field is in there if you do want it. And so you do need to have something there, a link to a PDF format. The next one is just minor tweaks to SO4, so including information on activity by country, and then you have to have it year to date marked inside in that form. There's some minor typos that have been addressed. So for instance, here on S15, guaranteed level misspelled there, and just tidying up things like that. So again, in the actual reporting templates, you'll see that updated. And then often you might have noticed if you're filling out QRTs in the past, there's a lot of these crossed out boxes. So you'll see there on the left, there's a few examples from S25 where there's crossed out boxes, and they're typically boxes that you don't necessarily have to fill in. So what they've done is they've actually removed those boxes to make it simpler. So again, if you have any kind of spreadsheets or formats outside of your QRT process, you have to bear that in mind that these have changed around. And actually, I'll flick back there. One thing to note though is that all those cell references, and for instance, the LAC DT on the right there is referenced as OR0640, and it was also previously referenced as OR0640. So that means if you're looking at the log files, it is the same cell reference if you want to look up for information on how you fill out that cell. The next one is they've also crossed out some rows that are not reportable. So previously, for instance, on S2601 for market risk, there was some items in there that might necessarily be relevant and have to be reported. So again, some of those now can be crossed out. And then there's some ad hoc XBRL fields. So if there is extra information you provide, they've added that in, so it works with the XBRL tagging. So that must have been an issue for some companies in the past. So there's a bit of information in there as well around Brexit. So that's kind of that EU countries list. So we don't really know exactly where that's going to land, but I suppose some of the changes they put through in that hoc fix do relate to that. So I won't really get into too much detail on that, given that it's not particularly relevant, UK for every company, but there is some information in there, and they've made a few tweaks to allow for what's going to happen. So that's a quick fly through of the QRT updates. So really, in comparison to previous years, I'd probably summarize it as the level of changes really isn't too bad. It's minor updates and minor fixes. And in the tool, we'll have updated all those templates that we do show. So what about the Central Bank of Ireland? In the past years, they would have provided new national specific templates. So remember, these NSTs are really they're like QRTs, but the Irish specific versions of these. So if you are an Irish based entity, you'd be happy to know that the CBI have come out and said that there won't be any new taxonomies for the NSTs. So no changes there, which is good news. Then for the reporting deadlines, and I've kind of pulled the information here for the Irish entities. So a lot of the deadlines, to summarize and to refresh yourselves, they are in line with what was there for last year end. So that means your quarterly QRTs, you kind of see up the top there, pretty much in that first week of February. So you're getting all that quarterly QRT work done in January. And then a lot of those annual items, so annual QRTs, you've got your solo entity SFCR, you've got your solo entity ORSR. All those reports really are happening around that first week of April. And as well, on top of that, and because of some CBI specific requirements, you've got those directors actually statements as well in relation to some of those reports, and also those directors compliance certificates. So all of that work, really, there's really two main deadlines to bear in mind if you're just a solo entity. So that's the end of February and then a week into April. So another maybe item to note, and it's kind of been not necessarily brought through the requirements during the year, is that the companies previously had an option to not recalculate the SCR, so the Solvency Capital Requirement, on a quarterly basis. There has been a bit of informal communication on that throughout the year. So EIOPA have published something in light of COVID and all of that they would prefer if companies at least did an estimate, or if they can do a full recalculation of their SCR, and they wanted that reported quarterly during the year. The CBI then came out later in the year, I think it was around September, and mirrored the comments from EIOPA. So saying that they did expect at least an estimate to be provided in your quarterly QRTs. So I haven't really heard yet of whether the CBI have been querying with companies if their SCR number in the QRTs didn't change from one quarter to the other. But I do know a number of my clients have been at least doing some estimate to change it, whether it's even a risk driver approach or some high level adjustment, just to do something to try and capture movements within the quarter. It won't be an issue for companies for year end because you presumably do a full recalculation, but I'd say we probably will expect to see some form of communication with the central bank as to what we should do for Q1. So whether they do expect that you do an SDR recalculation or re-estimation, or whether you can go back to the previous modus operandi and that you're allowed to use that year-end figure maybe and just roll it forward. But I just thought that was useful to highlight. So the other item I mentioned was the new EIOPA Level 3 guidelines. And these are centered around the topic of information, communication, technology, security, and governance. So the Level 3 guidelines, it's really sitting in that Pillar 2 space. And what EIOPA have come out with is that they said, information, communication, technology, obviously an important sector and an important topic for companies, and they've tried to wrap it underneath those articles 41 to 44 of the directive, the Solvency II directive. So again, that's the kind of risk management and the governance sections of the Solvency II directive. So it's tied in underneath there. It'll probably sit within your Pillar 2 way of thinking. These guidelines do apply from the 1st of July, so there is plenty of time now to read those requirements and get the provisions put in. So in terms of where this will impact the tool, we have scoped it already, and we think it'll probably slot into the risk management systems module and the governance module. But again, when we do make these edits, we will send you out a release note saying exactly what has changed in the tool. And again, there's an audit trail in the tool as well as what has changed. So some of the topics that do get included in it, there are 25 new guidelines within the paper. So some of the key ones, one is that there's going to be a new policy that you have to create. So an information security policy and measures. So, and when you probably have a policy on these items already, but I suppose we're maybe upgrading it to policy with a capital P. So something that would probably have to be board approved and maybe go through the same level of rigor or a bit more rigor. Like your other policies that you already have in place, like for instance, the risk management policy and your capital management policies and so on. So really kind of adding this policy into that full suite of Solvency II policies. And there'll be a new function set up. So at present you have your actuarial function, your risk function, the audit function, the compliance function. So now you have an information security function. And again, you probably have people already doing this, but it's making it that formal role. Audit as well, there's audit requirements around this particular area. And business continuity planning is one to kind of pull up. Again, I'm sure everyone's doing this, but it's just being flagged out and something that you have to make sure you're meeting the requirements. And also it's touching on outsourcing as well. So obviously a lot of companies do outsource their IT, so they make sure that they've got some information on that, and that will be covered. There's plenty of detail in the paper, and as I said, it is already out there, so worthwhile having a look once you're kind of into the new year to see what's within that. So at that stage, I'm going to hand you over to Sinead Clark, who is going to talk to us about the Solvency II 2020 review.
Hi everyone. As Patrick said, I'm going to talk about Solvency II 2020 review, and I'm also going to talk about recovery and resolution planning. So in terms of the Solvency II 2020 review, the Solvency II directive states that the Commission has to review certain aspects of the Solvency II text by 1 January 2021. At a minimum, they need to review the long-term guarantee measures, equity risk measures, the methods, assumptions and parameters used in the calculation of the standard formula SCR, the calculation of the minimum capital requirement, and some group supervision and capital management aspects of the Solvency II text. In addition to this, EIOPA and the Commission have also looked at reviewing other aspects of the Solvency II text, such as the low interest rate environment, risk margins, proportionality, and reporting and disclosure. I'm just having an issue with the slides. I'm not sure if anyone else. Oh, there we go. They're back on. So EIOPA are looking at a couple of other aspects as well. And they had originally planned that a lot of this would be carried out over 2019 and 2020. So during 2019, There were a couple of consultation papers issued. There were 2 consultations in July and October 2019 on the proposals for the changes to Solvency II as part of the 2020 review. They had planned to carry out a holistic impact assessment in March 2020, and then they planned to issue final advice to the European Commission in June 2020. But like many things this year, COVID-19 had an impact on the plans. So EIOPA issued some extensions and additional requests as a result of the pandemic. The first thing they did was they issued an extension for the holistic impact assessment to allow firms to get this in as we all moved to working from home. And this was extended by 2 months. So the end March deadline was extended to June. They also then decided to ask a subset of those companies to carry out an additional assessment later on in the year between July and September, based on the balance sheet at 30th of June, to understand if COVID-19 had a material impact on the Solvency II 2020 review. And then as a result of this, the final advice was delayed. So instead of June 2020, the final advice was pushed back to December, and we expect that it'll be published shortly. So this has a knock-on effects elsewhere. With the final advice being delayed, other aspects and implementation of the 2020 review will also be delayed. So it's expected that the Commission, once they receive the final advice, will prepare draft regulatory text, and that this will be prepared in June, July 2021 at the earliest, and possibly Q3 2021. However, Gabriele Bernardino, the chairman of EIOPA, has stated that while they looked at the impact of COVID-19 on the proposals, there's not going to be any material changes. The fundamental elements that were covered in the consultation papers will remain the same. So what does this mean for implementation? So the regulation will need to go through the normal process for approval within the European Commission, and this will require political agreement. And it could take a couple of years for this to go through all the various stages. So it could be 2023 or 2024 before the Solvency II 2020 review changes are actually implemented. So in some ways, this could be seen as good news. There's not going to be any change in your Solvency II 2020 or your Solvency II calculations for the next few years. But there were other aspects of the advice that would have been helpful for companies. So for example, there were simplifications to some of the QRTs and things like that. And it's likely now that those will also be delayed a little bit with implementation in 2023 or 2024. Gabriele Bernardino also noted that if we're still in a low interest rate environment at that time, there will be a mechanism to dampen and mitigate it. However, he didn't give any further details on that at this point. So if you are interested in any of the proposals from the consultation phase, we produced a number of briefing notes at that time, and they're all available on our website. The slides will be shared afterwards, so you'll have access to these links. As the final advice is being published over December, I expect that we will also be issuing briefing notes in the new year based on the final advice. So you can look out for those if you're a member of our mailing list. You should get them automatically, but also maybe link in with Patrick or Gavin if you are interested in receiving any updates on that. One of the other things that they are looking at under the Solvency II 2020 review is recovery and resolution planning. And part of EIOPA's review is to see if they can harmonise recovery and resolution planning across Europe. EIOPA has been talking about this for a few years now. And with that in mind, the CBI issued a consultation paper on preemptive recovery planning for insurers and reinsurers earlier this year. The consultation paper was issued in June and responses were due in October. And we expect the CBI will be publishing its final regulation and guidelines in this area in early 2021. It's expected, and the proposals state that it will apply to insurers, captives and Irish branches. So any insurance company in Ireland that falls under Solvency II rules. And really what the CBI are looking for here is for companies to prepare a preemptive recovery plan, so have a document that's reviewed annually by the board and approved by the board that looks at various scenarios that a company could use to improve their solvency position if they were in a stress state. So for example, if the SCR dropped below 100%, if the SCR coverage dropped below 100%, what actions the company would take. And they need to be realistic and achievable. So there's lots of things that you need to do as part of your recovery plan to demonstrate that, such as scenario testing and things like that. And it's expected that the recovery plan would be that you would need to submit it to the CBI for any PRISM high and medium high rated firms, and then any lower rated firms would be required to submit to the CBI on request. So the consultation paper includes regulations and guidelines. The regulations include a couple of high-level details on the approval process and the review of the plan, but it also goes into detail on recovery indicators, confirmation on the trigger framework, and you need to ensure that the triggers can operate reliably under financial stress. And then it also includes quite detailed requirements on the plan contents. So actually the consultation paper sets out almost a template that insurers can use to draft their recovery and resolution plans. So it can be quite useful for companies if they're looking at this for the first time. The guidelines then include more detail. They set out the links between recovery planning, the insurer's system of governance, the risk management framework, and the ORSA. There is some allowance for proportionality. However, the CBI have also stated that insurers can't just rely on their group recovery plans. And then the guidelines go into a lot of detail around strategic analysis of the company's business lines and risks, the indicator framework that they would expect companies to use and to document in their recovery plan, and then impact and feasibility assessments for recovery options. So these more detailed sections really are a step beyond what we are currently seeing in the market for companies that have recovery plans in place. And it's expected, if the consultation paper in its current format is finalised and final regulations and guidelines are issued, that some companies that already have recovery plans in place will need to look at them again over 2021 to assess and maybe even update them to meet the CBI's requirements. So just as an example, I thought it'd be useful maybe to show you the proposed format of the recovery plan that the CBI have set out in the consultation paper. So the top section, part A, B and C, is really an executive summary. You have to provide a summary of the plan, any changes since the previous plan was approved, and outline the approval process and confirm approval by the board. The middle part in green here is really the meat of the plan. You have to outline the governance process, strategic analysis, recovery indicators, recovery options, and scenario analysis. This is really where companies need to look at the options that they could use in a stress environment if they needed to rebuild their capital position, improve their solvency coverage ratio. Which of those options are realistic? Actually run the numbers, run the scenario analysis to see what impacts those options would have. And in addition to that, set out some recovery indicators that can be used going forward. And then the final part is communication plan and information on preparatory measures. So it is quite detailed, and I expect that companies will risk teams will be very much focused on recovery planning over 2021 once the final guidelines and regulations are published. And as Patrick said, it's not fully clear how the CBI will bring these into regulation and legislation, but it is expected that they probably will fall under the Solvency II regime, whether that's through the domestic actuarial regime, or through the just the Solvency II review, given the alliance with the Solvency II 2020 review. But if they do fall under Solvency II, the S2 CAT will be updated for compliance with these requirements also. So with that in mind, I'll hand you over to Gavin now, who's going to look at the tool in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Sinead. I'm just waiting for my screen to share there. Hopefully, yeah. Great. So thanks, Sinead and Patrick, for the introduction. And as they mentioned, I'm going to look at the more practical side of the Solvency II compliance assessment tool. So we're going to look at it under kind of two headings, almost a refresher for the people on the call to look at the functionality, and a reminder ahead of year end exactly the main things you're going to need to know, for sending out your questions and setting up reports so that you can get the most out of the tool for your next assessment. And then the second part we're going to look into is functionality updates from Clarity, our technology partners. So we'll point out a few of these extra functions in the tools that you might find useful, and we'll be sending out kind of release notes on updates and things like that. So we'll be able to keep you all in the loop, but hopefully this this brief overview will get people started, and there's always the help desk email there to get in contact if you ever want to ask anything further, or else there's a Q&A box there if you want to try to jump onto this now. So just as a reminder, we have the tool open here, and there's the 3 folders on the left here you can see on the home page. So this is broken down into the 3 pillars of Solvency II. So we have pillar 1 for assets and liabilities, own funds, capital requirements, and then within each of these modules you have the separate questions that you're going to send out and get people to quantify the compliance there, and then that'll feed into all your reporting that you want at the end. So we have pillar 1, pillar 2 on ORSA risk management systems and governance, and then pillar 3 on SFCR, ORSOR, and then QRTs. So that's a reminder for how the tool is broken down and how you're going to go into each assessment separately for those sections. So I'm going to go in and show an example of how we're going to set out these questions. So if we go into grid view here for the pillar 2 governance I've clicked into, you can see the questions are listed down here as we scroll down. And you can see there's answers here in the system with numbers from 1 to 5 and red, amber, green scores. So you hopefully be familiar with this from previous years, but for anyone that hasn't seen this before, the scores are set up to lead to the ultimate end reporting, where a 1 and a 2 are non-compliant and will give you a 0% score, 3 and a 4 are partial compliance for 50% score, and a 5 is fully compliant for 100%. So just as a reminder, you'll see there's different questions that you'll want to send out. So if we go to the very first step, the first thing you're going to have to do when you go about this is to send out questions to people. So if you select questions down here on the left with the boxes ticked, you'll see that they're selected here. And when I hit delegate, this button here, it'll give me an option to send the questions out. So if I send these to myself and give them a label called user seminar, you'll see that this is set up to send those questions to my email address. And as a user, I'll receive the email that will pop up and give me a view of what questions I need to answer. So that user has a limited view, and they're automatically activated by you typing their email in here. So the manager will have the full view I've shown so far, and that's the kind of 2 status levels that for the tool's access. And if you want to add new managers, it's just you contact our help desk and we'll add them in on our side. So back to this delegation section, we've entered the email in and we have the label we have here. So for example, this could be year-end 2020 when you come around to doing this after Christmas. So the time that the email gets sent out is selected here. And it's always good to note that if you send this at a time in the future, you're giving yourself more options later down the line where you can clone these delegations. So instead of doing the same delegations again and again, that you can clone previous labels that we had here. So say if we had this user seminar and we wanted to clone what we send out, that function's available once you pick a time in the future. So you can do that even if you just pick the same day and change the time to somewhere later on. So if I hit done here, that's all my items filled in. And if I hit delegate, you'll see that the new assessment's created there in the label along the top. So the blue here are questions that have yet to go out. So that email hasn't gone out yet. And if you hover over, you can see my name is there and the time that the email will be sent out is there as well. So those questions can't be answered until then. So you're giving yourself some time. The further you set that into the future, you can change who those emails are going to go to by going back in. So say, for example, I realized these 2 first questions weren't actually for Gavin, but were for Patrick. I just select them here along the side and then select the label up the top. And you can send these to a new person if you hit delegate. So once you've picked the questions horizontally and vertically, that's how you can go in. So if I click delegate again here, I'll just change this email to Patrick's. And if I hit delegate, those questions will update. So if I hover over these questions now, you can see that Patrick's email is going to receive that information at that timestamp. So that's just a reminder there on the delegation aspect. I mentioned when we were picking a time to send it out that it's always better to pick a time in the future for cloning capabilities. So the cloning is where you can copy over all the people you sent those questions to. So if you see it here in the past, you'll see names hovered over there. And if you know those names are also going to be transferred into the future for this next assessment, you can use that as a starting point for cloning. And that's just the white button here at the top. So you'll see here that what you want to clone. And then as an example, we might call this year end 2020. We were going to clone all those users who we delegated questions to. So if we clone the label here, you'll see these questions have gone out now. And you'll notice the difference between the blue and the yellow questions here. The yellow are the questions that are active. So if you go in here, these can be answered straight away. And that's the kind of flag for something being not answered, whereas the blue is something that hasn't been activated yet. Another thing I'll show just from a manager's perspective. So when you're trying to implement the different people in your company using this tool, it's good to keep track of different answers and what people have said. So if you click into this question as an example, you'll see that someone gave it a score as a 5 and the comment is there. So you can actually, as a manager or even the users that also have sight of this question, you can reset the questions. Say if you've reevaluated this and you want to change your score from a 5 to a 4, you can do so here and then submit your answer. And then when we go back into that question, beside that last button with the arrow, which I used to reset, if you hover over it says reset question. The next button beside it is the audit log. So if you click in there, you can see all the past answers for that question, the timestamp that they were at, and the answers that were there. So that's another useful feature just from this manager implementation view. And the last thing I was going to show on this is just setting reminders. So we've sent these questions out for this time, but that's only one email to go to someone's inbox. So it could be useful to send a second email in the hope that if the questions still haven't been answered, a second email will go out just to make sure things are covered. So if I pick that question again, horizontally and vertically, in this more drop down, there's lots of different options. So we're not going to go into everything on this overview, but we have our user manual and the help desk, if there's any questions on all these other functionalities in here. So the set reminders was the thing I was just going to show. So again, you can just pick a time for when you want the reminder to go out. So say 2 weeks after the first email, if nobody's answered the question, you want the second email to go out. You just hit set reminder here, and that's all set up automatically. So I think that covers everything just from the manager point of view. I wonder, Patrick, did you have anything else to add just on important points for a manager controlling the tool at the minute?
Yeah, thanks very much, Gavin. That was a great run through. So yeah, as Gavin said, I think that really, a lot of the people, I suppose, at this user seminar, you're the ones behind the workings of the tool in the companies. So you are the ones that are managing these assessments and organizing them and often delegating out those questions. So I think, yeah, as Gavin has shown, it's just useful to see this is a task that you might have already done or you'll be doing in the coming weeks. How do you send out those questions again if you're doing a year-end assessment? And using the cloning functionality is very useful there. And as he said, setting it for a future date and being able to set a note, that it'll go out in the future, but then you can still make tweaks to who they're going to before they go out. And again, I'd maybe echo what Gavin was saying about in terms of practicality. Useful to send out an email to people in advance, just saying, oh, a reminder, you're going to get some emails from the system. This is the deadlines that we're hoping to get this all done by, and just a bit of a refresher on that, and also encouraging people to fill in the narrative boxes as well. I know Gavin's going to show us a bit of the user perspective next, but even kind of just telling people that when you're filling out the answers, do give us a good narrative, because if someone's checking it or looking back over in time, that's really really valuable. So back over to you, Gavin, and you can kind of maybe show us that user perspective thing.
Great, thanks for that, Patrick. So yeah, I'll just jump into this user perspective. So you'll have people in the tool that you've sent those questions out to. So I just have an example email here, and it could be good to just flag this email address. This is where they're going to come from. And like Patrick said, just so people know in advance that they're going to have this in their inbox. So this is the more limited view of a user who you just want to answer specific questions. you'll see that they're just told to click this link and they're told which questions they've been assigned here. So you can see it's in Pillar 2 Governance, and the label here is User Seminar 2020, but you could call that your quarterly audit or your annual audit, different names, and that's the label at the top of the screen. So if I click this link, you'll see a different kind of view where the questions pop up straight away for a user. And this is just a reminder that they're asked to answer these questions from 1 to 5, and it brings them straight to this piece, so they don't need to worry about other items. So they're shown exactly what questions are here up the top, and if they go beyond this, you can scroll with the right button here if they go on further than the list there. And this is the narrative box Patrick was talking about. So like Patrick said, it's good to emphasize that the more detail they give here, it's clearer to a manager reviewing it, what's been said. So you can see they've given the score of 5 here, and they can comment on why they believe that's the case. So just a reminder to the really useful feature of the tool is the link to Solvency II documentation, because you can send out these questions and ask people to put a score on it, but if they still had to go look for all the documentation backing that decision, it could take a long time. So the tool is set up in a really useful way to show 3 levels of Solvency II regulation. So the level 1 directive, the delegated acts in level 2, and the level 3 guidelines from EIOPA. So you can see if you click this link, Article 41 will pop up straight away, and it will bring you exactly to that piece that you need to focus on. So Article 41, paragraph 1 in brackets here. So if I click this as an example, you'll see my screen just loads, and it brings us exactly to what that user needs to review. So the user doesn't have to worry about scrolling through the text or pressing Control F or anything like that. They can just get to exactly what they need, and they can review all the relevant documentation for this question if they click through all the links here. So you'll see this brings me to the level 2 delegated acts, and it brings me exactly to Article 258 and the piece I need to review. So that's really the user perspective, showing the documentation they need to back it up. So it's just important that as they go through and they're submitting here with this blue button, that they have their score and their comments, like Patrick said. And it could be good to just give users an overview of what they need to do as they go through this. So the same thing, you can give the different scores, and this is all updated live in the tool. And you can see they can review the question here and put the answers in. So if we go out here, we can see the tools updating these answers live. So as a manager, you'd have a view of this tool at a higher level, and you'd understand what these answers are going in. So I guess that's all I had to add from the user perspective, Patrick, unless you had anything else you wanted to comment on as well.
No, I think that's perfect, Gavin. So yeah, maybe the message is that from a user perspective, it's actually quite a simple process. They just get the emails into their inbox, and they click on the link, they enter the tool, and they answer the questions. And as you said, the links are there. So yeah, I think that's all good. And again, if anyone has any questions on this stuff as we're working through it, please do feel free to stick it into the Q&A, and we'll either deal with them as they arise or we'll deal with them at the end. But yeah, I think fire ahead there, Gavin.
Great, thanks very much. So the last thing I was just going to cover on the refresher part of this seminar was just creating reports. So that's the useful part that we've seen before, where there's a few different ways to pull out your answers that you've had. So if you're in here, Pillar 2 Governance, you can go straight to the grid view we saw with all the colored answers if you press this traffic light button here. So you can see grid view comes up there, and if we hit the traffic light, you have our answers here. So you'll see the scores that I talked about earlier based on, you give 1 to 5, and then it creates a score from 0 to 100% based on those questions. So you can see here, if I hover over the 59% or 58% that's here over year-end 2017 and click it, it creates a report instantly. So it's kind of the quickest way to make a report, and it's really useful to work on a single label. So you have your year-end 2017, it's all labeled here, and you have your 4 colors for questions flagged. So you've green for 5s, amber as partially compliant for 3 and 4, non-compliant are 1 and 2 answers, and then those questions that are not answered are also flagged here. But you'll see that that's example we've done is completed, so there's no questions not answered. So there's the pie chart to show the breakdown, and the bar chart here is by each section. So if we go back here, you'll see there's separate breakdowns. If we press this view, it'll just give us the headings. So you can see there's questions under section 1 for general requirements, section 2 for policy, and so forth. And that's broken down in the bar chart here, if we go back to the chart. So you can tick here which questions you want to be shown in the report. So if you want all the questions, you can press this, show all answers. And then if a more limited view, if you just want to show your red answers, you can keep that one ticked like I've done there. And then when you scroll below the charts, those questions that you've chosen to include are here, and the comments that you have are also flagged up. So like Patrick said, it's really useful to get people to put detailed comments in here, because if you see an NA like that, it doesn't give you a lot of context, but the report also shows who answered those questions, the times they were answered, and everything. So another useful bit of this reporting is to create a PDF. It's just this button here, and we've seen a lot of clients find this useful for putting it into a board pack, and so that board members can sign off on their year-end Solvency II compliance certs. So if you just add this to a board pack, it's got all the detail you need there, and you can customize it as you want. So that's just a report for, say, one set of answers, but you can combine things in here. The report generator button that I just pressed up the top. So if we go through here, you can add different modules. So if we just wanted to put in the Pillar 2 modules all in one report, we can pick that here. So you have Pillar 2 governance, and then if you scroll down, you have Pillar 2 risk management systems. And as you press this plus button, you can add the different modules that you want to put together. And then we'll put in Pillar 2 ORSA. So this would create a report fully on the Pillar 2 questions altogether, and you just pick the consistent label here. So year-end 2017, and they're the vertical labels with all the questions inside them. And you can add a title here and say Pillar 2 year-end 2017. And if you hit this create an aggregate report, it puts everything together. So we saw that quick view for just the governance section, but that kind of step-by-step shows how you can add things together. And it shows the same breakdown that we saw before, same option to put it to a PDF. And then the bar chart here breaks down the separate sections. So governance, risk management systems, and ORSA are all there in different sections. And then these links here bring us to the report just on a single module level. So if we wanted to go back to what we just had on governance, that link is there, and it also creates the links for the other items as well. So I think that wraps up the refresher of the tool. Patrick, do you have anything to add there before I go into just covering some of the functionality updates from Vitalarity?
No, I think just maybe one comment on the reports. So yeah, those PDF reports, the auto-generated ones in the tool. So I mean, I have heard feedback from a good few clients that they are quite powerful in terms of going into a board pack. And directors are going to be asked to sign compliance certificates at the end of the year on particular topics like QRTs, but also on general compliance and solvency requirements. So a lot of companies I've heard are using these PDF reports showing the compliance of all the requirements. Otherwise, how else are their directors getting comfort with these? So this is really gathering it all together, and they're using those. And I've also kind of heard informally that the CBI is seeing these in board packs as well. And I know I heard anecdotally recently from someone using the outsourcing tool that someone in the CBI kind of saying, oh, they're arranged, and that was the first time they'd seen it, for instance. So it does look good to kind of have that evidence background for how you are seeing it compliant. So those reports are really useful.
Great, thanks for that, Patrick. So I guess just before we finish up, we'll show you some of the new features. So what I've shown you already are kind of the core things that you're going to need to know, and hopefully it's a good refresher for what you're going into for this year-end process and putting your reports together. So hopefully that's one point, but if there's a few new features that I'll just point out here before wrapping up. So one is here on the right, you'll notice this My To-Do list. So if you click in here, it'll show you tasks. So you can see these traffic lights, they'll bring you back to questions that are unanswered. So you'll see these open tasks, and if I click into here, it'll bring me exactly to what I have to answer. So on data quality TPs, if I click this grid view, you can see the questions that I still have outstanding are popping up. So it'll give me that overview of everything I need to do. And it'll be really useful if you have people from certain departments that have to answer questions across different pillars. It's a good way to have this all together to sum it up. And you also have your actions. So actions aren't something we've jumped into in too much detail, but they're just how you can flag that you want something to do. As a manager, you can notify a user to say, this is a certain action that we want completed. So this is part of your to-do list as well. And if you click into the little flag here, it'll bring you to the actions view. So this is all explained in the manual, but just as a reminder, you kind of have this breakdown in the similar format where the green are actions that are completed and the red are overdue. So another functionality has actually been added in here as well to prioritize actions. So you can see here this old question doesn't have a priority on it, but if you go to the second one that's red here, there's a low. So you can tag something as low, medium, high priority. And if you go back through the process of adding actions, which is all explained in our manual, you'll see there's a new field added in here for priority where you can go low, medium, high when you create that action. So another detail that I'll add that's kind of more up to date is if we go back into the governance section here into our grid view, you'll remember we wanted to delete questions before. So say this question was answered here, and if we wanted to go back in, you can see there's a 5 there. If you wanted to remove that question, the way you had to do that was select it horizontally and vertically, click more, and remove delegations. So nothing's changed there. The question still has the good security warning where it tells you exactly what you're going to delete. You type it in here, but for now you actually have to send it to a separate email address as well if questions have already been answered. So you can type in an email address and then you delete that question from a link in your email. So another item to just note is the session timeout. So there's a default session timeout for 15 minutes, but if any of you guys using the tool want to change that default, just get in touch and we can do that on our side. That's an update that Vyclarity have put through as well. Another option is for delegating questions. So previously when you delegated a question, say if we just select one question here and hit delegate, if you type in the one email, that's all that we had previously. So we have there's a new function from Vyclarity now where you can CC another person's email. So this will be really helpful if you have more than one person that you want to kind of tackle those questions. And the audit trail function we have, that's really useful. So that if you kind of give this question to a team, someone will already see if it's answered, and if you can see when things were answered and who put those answers in. So this is kind of just giving people the option to send out maybe to 2 people if you're not sure exactly who's going to answer the question, and then they can kind of coordinate that between themselves.
And that's probably something as well that I know we've been asked about in the past. Can a question get sent to more than one person? So yeah, you can kind of see how it might work. For instance, if the actuarial function, there's a team of people working on it. So now you can send it to all of them, and it will still be tagged as one person will answer the question, and it'll the audit trail will capture that it's one person answering it rather than a team of people. So it's almost like fastest finger. Whoever gets in there first will have the first point in the audit trail. But if a manager or someone does come along and edit the answer, the audit trail, when you click into it, will capture that. So yeah, that's just a nice useful feature that people might find.
Great, thanks Patrick. So there was just only one other point I was going to mention before the Q&A, and it's just this update from Vyclarity on cloning. So you'll see the example I cloned earlier. We sent these questions over and it gave these options to be answered. So there's really useful function now if you're cloning and you know that not a lot has changed. Say if you've done this process quarterly and you just want to clone over and that a lot of the answers probably haven't changed, you can clone the option here and say, if we call this user seminar, if you click this include content button, this is the new feature from Vyclarity. So if you hit include content and hit clone label, the answers are already there as a starting point. So you can go through and review what needs to change. And if you knew, for example, that certain questions could be updated, you could go in here and say you're kind of happy that everything that was compliant still is, you could just go through and revisit the questions that are ambers and reds as you go through.
Sorry,
yeah, go on ahead, Patrick. Yeah, no worries.
So yeah, again, this one is probably a question that we probably heard from a few different people over time. And I think Vyclarity probably heard it on their side a fair bit as well. So naturally, it is better to send out the questions and do a full reassessment. And that's a cleaner way of doing it. It means someone has had to physically go through the process of, even if they're copying the answer from last time, they physically have to kind of copy it and consciously do that. So when you do clone these questions over using this new feature, all the information will still be timestamped. So let's say it was last year's assessment, it'll still get timestamped as last year's answer, unless you go in and if you don't want to change anything, you just go in, you reset it and save it. But otherwise, it'll still show as being last year's answer. So I suppose I'd maybe kind of add a small bit of caution to people as to how they use this, and don't let it don't fall into bad habits, and do try and do a full assessment of the requirements. But I suppose it will make it easier for you to bring the information across. There are other bits and pieces, I suppose, around doing that Vitality developed here, and we won't get into all of them now. So there's now an option to import information from Excel for uploading. And if you hire a company that has more than one account, maybe different entities, but the information is pretty much the same, there's now also a feature where you can mirror the answers in one account into the other account. And again, I don't think they're relevant for every company, so if you do want to hear about those, please do get in touch with the help desk and we can set something up for you separately. And another piece of functionality, I suppose, that we're working on at the moment is around the audit trail. So we're working with Vitality to implement something that will make it a bit tidier to show the changes to links over time. So having maybe drop downs and things to show you the previous links and the new links, so it's a bit clearer to see what's happened over time. So that's kind of the updates piece, I think. I don't know, Gavin, was there anything else you had to cover on that? I think that was our list.
No, that's everything on my list. So I think we're probably just jumping into the Q&A now. I think we have a few minutes left. So
yeah, so I think the first question we had in is, and we've kind of been able to spend a bit more time on those other updates because I see we've not too many questions coming in. So one question there is about log files and those QRT edits that I was talking about. Was there a new set of log files to go with those? So the answer on that one is no, there weren't log files updated, so they only updated templates. So in the tool you'll see for those questions, QRTs, we will put up the new template, but there isn't a new log file, so it's going to be last year's log file that we use. There's another quick question here, Gavin, if you can jump into the tool, and just asking to show, we did mention the user manual to show where that's stored in the tool. So I think in our documentation section, so up the top there's a documentation tab. And I think in this Solvency requirements piece, this is actually where we have a lot of the links to legislation. So if you're looking for a piece of legislation, that's a great place to go. And there's also an Excel version of the tool. And in that help tab, we have the actual document and the user manual itself. And in that's got loads of screenshots and it's detailed information on what users do in the tool and what managers do in the tool. So if you do need it, it's there. But also the help desk email is also shown there. I'm just checking here to see if there's any other queries coming through. So if you have any Q&A. Yeah, no, I don't think there's any other questions, just those two. So if anyone has a question, I'll leave it open for another minute when I'm talking. So please do stick a question in there. Alternatively, if there's anything we've gone over that you'd like to see a bit more of, or if you have any particular queries or questions, and there's the functionality, something you'd like to get your hands on, do just drop the help desk in an email. We're no problem having a 5 or 10 minute session with you, or even if you need something longer, that's no problem at all either. So we can cover that off, no bother. So just to maybe wrap up then, so I suppose first off to thank you all for attending today. It's a shame at this stage of the day we'd usually be heading downstairs to treat you to a lunch in the Conrad, so naturally we can't do that this year, but we just thought that maybe hopefully you can still get your lunch on us. We're hoping to send out a Just Eat voucher just as a small little token to everyone, so at least we can still buy you lunch even if we aren't there. But hopefully next year we'll all be able to have lunch together in person and maybe have a bit of a chat seminar. So again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please send them into the help desk. And again, a reminder that if you can have a look at that link that Arena published in the Q&A, just to track who attended. So we have those details for CPD records or anything else, but also those for sending out those Just Eat vouchers as well. I think we need for that too. So again, thank you very much, and hopefully see you in the new year.